Tonight, Martin McGuinness tells The View none of the local parties will be kingmakers in the post-election shake-up. And no matter what the outcome of the poll, his party will not be taking its seats. I began the interview by asking Mr McGuinness if this Westminster election really matters to Sinn Féin.
I think this election matters to all of us. The outcome of the election can have very profound consequences for all of us. Given that we don't know at this stage what shape of a government will emerge, will it be one led by the Conservatives or one led by Labour? And obviously the austerity agenda that the Tories have committed themselves to, the fact that they've withdrawn effectively £1,500 million out of our budget over the course of the last 4 or 5 years and have pledged to impose more cuts of something like £30 billion over the course of the next 2 years. Represents a very serious challenge for all of us.
Well, we'll come on to the details of austerity in just a moment, but a lot of your opponents ask, you're fighting an election to win seats you won't take in a parliament whose writ here you don't recognise, so why do you bother to stand?
Well, a lot of politicians are accused of not having principles, but we have a principle, and the principle is that we don't accept or wish to bestow the right of any British government to rule over this part of Ireland. And I say that not to be offensive, it's a very principled Republican position.
And that principle is sacrosanct, is it?
Absolutely. But I think that the main point that needs to be made is this, is that whenever the issue of the north of Ireland is debated in the House of Commons, and the public know this themselves, they look at the empty green benches. And I don't think they believe for 1 minute that any of the MPs who show up there have done anything of any profound nature in terms of improving the lives of the people here. The negotiations that I have been involved in as Sinn Féin's chief negotiator over the course of the last 20 years has yielded far more. I'm talking about the Good Friday Agreement, I'm talking about the St Andrews Agreement, the Hillsborough Agreement. And if you look at the Stormont House Agreement, for example, where during the course of that, I asked all of the other parties on the executive to meet with myself and Peter Robinson. And I put it to them that this was an opportunity for us to put it up to David Cameron. And out of that, to cut a long story short, out of that came 650 million of new money.
Okay, so that's
plus
politics working
other
in your
flexibilities
view.
Which will allow us to put in place the voluntary exit scheme, which allows us to modernise the civil service, but as well as that,
come on to that in a moment.
But let me finish this last point.
Sure.
Yield £90 million in savings and salaries, which we can put into frontline services, into education and health.
We'll come on to the economics of all of that in just a moment or two, but just to go back to that original point of principle, as you called it, the same point of principle applied to taking seats in the Dáil and Stormont. You ditched that in 1986 and 1998 respectively. So your opponents wonder, why wouldn't you ditch it this time?
Well, I think the situations are completely different.
What are they?
Well, they are absolutely different, because being in an important position of influence in the Dáil, and now as we are in important positions of influences at Stormont. Remember, Eddie McAteer was the leader of the Nationalist Party for many, many years at Stormont, had no ministers whatsoever, couldn't get any legislation passed. I'm actually in government as one of 5 Sinn Féin ministers.
But the situation is arguably different. Of course, that's very different. Yeah. But the point is that this time around, with the election outcome so unpredictable, hanging by a thread, it is possible that if Sinn Féin goes back with 5 seats on May the 8th, you could actually have some influence, the like of which you might not have had in the past. So why would you not take your seats in Westminster if that tactic would help stop the Tories implementing further austerity cuts here in Northern Ireland upon your constituents? Well, it's different. For that reason, it's different this time.
Well, because of my view, that isn't going to happen. I have a very...
But you don't know.
I do know. I have a very clear view that the formation of the next British government revolves around 4 parties. The Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, and the Scottish National Party. And if you look at some of the comments that have been made by leading representatives of the Liberal Democrats over the course of the last number of days, specifically Paddy Ashdown's comments just within the last 36 hours, you can clearly see that what is shaping up here is some sort of an arrangement between the Liberal Democrats, Scottish Nationalists and the Labour Party to keep the Conservatives out.
Okay.
I don't believe that any of the parties here in the north of Ireland, whatever number they have elected to Westminster, will influence the outcome of that.
Okay, but some people think there could be an alliance of anti-Tories to keep David Cameron out of Downing Street. Let's say there was a chance to end the so-called bedroom tax. You don't like the bedroom tax, you want it gone. If Sinn Féin took its seats and could stop the bedroom tax, would that not be a point of principle worth thinking about? Would taking your seats in those circumstances not perhaps be defensible?
Well, we have stopped the bedroom tax. We have agreed, and the other parties in the executive have agreed, that the bedroom tax will not be imposed on people here, and we made arrangements for that during the course of the Stormont House negotiations.
Well, we don't know precisely where we are with all of that at the moment. On the wider austerity, on the wider austerity issues, you certainly haven't stopped austerity. The Tories have made it clear if they're back in government, there will be £12 billion more in cuts to welfare benefits. We don't know the details of how that's going to happen, but you can be pretty sure it's going to have an impact on people here in Northern Ireland, on your constituents here in Northern Ireland. You say you want to protect them. If taking your seats in Westminster could help protect them, would that not be a bridge worth crossing?
Well, first of all, if the Conservatives are returned, none of us will be able to protect people from the imposition of cuts of the scale of 30 million. It's not just the 12.
Maybe your support for a Labour-led government might stop the Tories getting in. That's the point.
But it's not. Well, you see, it comes back to my analysis. My analysis is that none of the parties here will be in the shake-up to be kingmakers in relation to
And that's your theory at the moment, and now it's mid-April. It's mid-April, but I'm asking you, if that happens, and if the maths turn out to be different from what you so confidently predict they will be, if that situation arose, would that not be a step worth taking? If you could stop austerity in Northern Ireland, if you could stop austerity right across the whole of the UK, maybe you don't care so much about that, but you certainly don't want it here. If you could actually make a difference, would you not want to make a difference?
Well, first of all, I do care about austerity, and I do care about poor people in England. I do care about poor people in Wales, and I do care about poor people in Scotland as much as I care
all
about
the more
people
reason
here.
to take your seats then in those circumstances.
But my analysis, I think, will be shown to be a very accurate assessment of how the next government is going to be formed, and neither the DUP, Sinn Féin, the Alliance Party, or the SDLP, or the Ulster Unions will influence that.
And Michelle Gildernew was asked recently about this in an interview she did for the Fermanagh Herald. Could she foresee the circumstances where Sinn Féin might take its seats? And she said, never say never. Never say never. Now, was that outside party line? Outside party policy?
No, I mean, the position is very, very clear. I mean, we are principled Republicans. We have a principle that we do not take our seats in Westminster because we are not prepared to bestow on any British government any form of legitimacy whatsoever to rule in this part of Ireland. And I remind you again that if you are to look at all of some of the most historic negotiations that have happened on this island over the last 20 years, more has been gained in those negotiations than people sitting on their backsides on the green benches in Parliament.
Okay. Not how, for example, the SDLP sees it, but there we go. Let's talk about some of the economics you referred to earlier in our conversation. Your manifesto effectively argues for the immediate and full devolution of all fiscal, economic and tax-varying powers to the Assembly. That's quite a wish list, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm also a realist. I mean, all of the parties put out their optimum positions, but I'm part of a 5-party coalition. I absolutely understand, and I'll be very honest with you, in the aftermath of the election, if we are to be effective in terms of representing our people here against the worst effects of austerity, then I have to work with Peter Robinson, I have to work with the other party leaders, and we have to have a combined approach, just as we had a combined approach during the course of the Stormont House negotiations. And I can assure you, in the aftermath of this election, whenever the comprehensive spending review is being considered, that's a negotiation that all of us have to be involved in. And it's a much more effective negotiation if we're all in it together.
Okay, it looks like a bit of a contradiction, though, doesn't it, in policy terms? On the one hand, you say Westminster, keep your nose out of the internal affairs of this part of Ireland, as you see it. On the other hand, you say, actually, do you know what? You owe us an extra 1.5 billion because you shortchanged us over the past 5 years. I mean, which is it? Stay out or give us more money?
Well, but the reality is that we have the Good Friday Agreement. I have remained very loyal to all of the agreements that I have signed up to. The Good Friday Agreement makes it absolutely clear that there can be no change to the constitutional position here unless people here vote to change that. So I have to work within those circumstances. And if I make an assessment, which Peter Robinson obviously agrees with, that the British government have effectively robbed us of £1,500 million over the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's quite legitimate for us to make that case.
Right. You mentioned earlier, Mr McGuinness, the fact that you've got to work with Peter Robinson in government, in the executive. He's the First Minister, you're the Deputy First Minister. The DUP says it's standing up for Northern Ireland. That's the election slogan it has for this campaign. If the DUP has some kind of significant leverage with whoever takes up residence in Downing Street in the latter part of May, would that be good for people here?
Well, I don't think they're going to have any leverage whatsoever.
I know you don't, but if they did, they think they might. They think they might.
My assessment is that the DUP will have no influence whatsoever in the formation of the
But if they did, would that be good for people here?
No,
Would you wish Peter Robinson all the best if he was sitting down with the new Prime Minister at the end of May and they were actually doing a deal for Northern Ireland, for people here, for your constituents as well as his constituents, that was good for everybody here? You'd say, fair dues, Peter. You took your seats. You've got influence. I choose not to.
Let's deal, Mark, with the realpolitik of where it's going to be at.
That's a possible scenario.
No. The scenario after the election is that Peter Robinson and I, as First and Deputy First Ministers, will be sitting down with the new Prime Minister. And it's much more effective.
He might be more powerful in that conversation than you are. That's the point.
Well, I think I was very powerful in the Stormont House Agreement. I was the one that made the argument and achieved the 650 million new money, the 2 billion in total, which allows us considerable flexibility, so that what flows from that in terms of extra finances for ourselves, we can use to put into health and education.
Final question. What does success look like? How do you measure success as far as Sinn Féin's concerned in this campaign?
Well, I think you have to see what Sinn Féin is doing in the context of what's happening on the island of Ireland and the fantastic election results that we had last year, having 4 MEPs elected and having elected representatives in every county in Ireland. We have changed the political landscape. So what we want to do is continue to change the political landscape, heading towards the next general election in the south and the next Assembly elections. And of course, we want to use the mandate that we're given by the people in a very responsible way. You know, I hear all this talk about, our critics in the south talking about Sinn Féin's fitness for government. Here am I in government with Peter Robinson, and our record, for example, in attracting foreign direct investment here to the north of Ireland is better than any other region in these islands as a result of the work that we've been doing. And we've done that against the backdrop of the worst economic downturn that the world has seen. And of course, in the context of the whole issue of corporation tax and the ability that we have to set our own rate of corporation tax, we actually do believe that we can put something like anything between 30 to 37,000 people into new jobs.
Martin McGuinness talking to me earlier this evening.